gentleman yields back, and I'll recognize my fellow Florida Gator from the town that I was born, Gainesville, Florida, Ms. Cammack. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and go Gators. You better get used to this. Thank you to all our witnesses and for everyone who's with us today in the room. I'll jump right into it. I know that there's a lot to cover in this space and a lot already has been covered, but I want to, for the benefit of folks who are tuning in, I'm going to start with you, Miss, I'm going to say it, oof, Olhausen. If I botch it, I'm sorry. I think it's important to understand what data is collected, and certainly Americans, I think, are woefully unaware of how much data is being collected and harvested. So I want you to describe, if you can, and I know you can, the type of data that is collected by online platforms from consumers during a typical user experience. Specifically, what is collected, stored, and or sent to other entities in the following instances. And these 3 are scenarios that are very common every day for everyday Americans. So when an individual reads, types, and sends emails on just, say, Gmail. That's the first scenario. When an individual interacts on Facebook, Twitter, or any other social media application. And when an individual shops online. I know, yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah. So based on the information that the coalition members collect, who are telecommunication providers, ISPs, right? So to provide information, to provide service, right? These services, they may have to collect a wide variety of data. For content of communications, they're not necessarily collecting the content to use for any purpose, for selling. Certainly, as consumers interact or users interact for payment processing, fraud prevention, things like that, they may collect a wide variety of data.
Right. And I think what people fail to realize is that everything is being tracked, and we're consenting to this in those ridiculous long terms of service, that nobody reads, right? I think they've even added an option where you can simply press a button and it takes you right to the very end. You don't even have to scroll anymore. So the amount of data, it's staggering. And I know everyone in this room knows this, but digging more into the legislation, and I'd like to open this up to our witnesses here today. Under the current draft legislation, there expressly names an opt-out mechanism. Now, me personally, I am not for an opt-out. I like an opt-in because, let's be honest, people are lazy, right? And so to have to go through the process of having to opt out and you're automatically opted in, I think that might create some confusion. So I'd like for folks to weigh in, and I'm going to start with you, Ms. Frederick. If you could weigh in on any thoughts you have on altering that into an opt-in directive rather than an opt-out.
I think that makes eminent sense in terms of making sure default settings are the most stringent. It would certainly hew in that direction. So I think it's a very interesting consideration for the discussion of draft.
Thank you.
I agree, it's an interesting consideration, and we know about the power of defaults that, where the user is, where the settings are set initially, usually are where they stay because of inertia, people don't have enough time. I think the one thing to think about is to think about in particular settings, whether the opt-out or opt-in is the right mechanism. In other words, there may be certain settings in which the default, it's okay for people to be opted in, but we still want to give them the choice to get themselves out of a particular system. So I think that's the balance we have to strike.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Karen.
I think the opt-in is interesting, but I think we should look at there's lessons learned from some of our international counterparts who've already put some really robust, to think about GDPR and others, privacy laws in place. So we should look at the lessons learned of opt-in versus opt-out. There's also technical ramifications. So for organizations that are going to have to really hold and maintain the technical aspect of data privacy, there's big differences between the opt-in and opt-out. So I would look at the advice of how, from keeping a main baseline of cyber standard, the differences would look out.
And I know I'm leaving you guys here. I have got 25 seconds, and I have another question I got to get to. Directing to you, do you think that it makes sense I'll say this, do you think it makes sense to give the FTC data security authority over the entire economy, the whole of the economy, but leave the FCC in charge of data breach notification for legacy communication?
So the coalition in its testimony suggests that data breach notification should also not be left with the FCC. Other concerns have been raised about that it would make sense to have it be unified under one agency.
I had a feeling you might say that. And I have, well, no, I'm over my time, so I apologize, Mr. Chairman, to our two remaining witnesses. If you could submit your answers to the question regarding opt-in, opt-out, that would be wonderful. Thank you. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back.